stay on, leave, you know. probably,
Oh, is that our thing?
I just like when you're somebody.
Well, you do this.
All those snacks were not in.
I missed a smile on the boat.
Yeah, but it doesn't work.
Oh, so you're saying your staff didn't clean out your desk?
I did not. I am like the worst staffer ever. I don't know why.
Are the cigars going to be in here? Is
The
this,
only thing I did perfectly was hold the Bible yesterday. That's all I did. I got to hold it, and I was like, oh,
Anymore.
This is good.
being too grounded by my father.
Rules Committee will come to order, and thank you very much. It's great to be back for a new year and a new term. And we've got two new members of the committee. Yeah, this guy, Ken Buck, who said to me this morning, he said, my over and under, I'll be here for 6 weeks. How long do you think I'll be here before I do something wrong? I said, well, Ken, you know, if you're going to sign up for something, you got to get committed. So we're going to test that theory. This Liz Cheney comes to us with a history of family commitment, not just to the house, but to the country. And we're.
Our father yesterday on the floor looking very healthy, strong.
It's really a good thing. Well, good. And to your members, welcome back, and glad you survived the Christmas holidays also. Tom Cole won, you know, Oklahoma won big, so he's happy. Look at that smile.
very happy guy.
Yeah. Okay, we're here for the adoption of the committee rules and other business related to the organization of the Rules Committee for the 115th Congress. And my opening remarks are that I am excited about the opportunities that we all have in front of us. I well remember when your party had this opportunity just a few years ago, the House, the Senate, the presidency. I will tell you that you learned some things, and so did we, and I'm sure we're going to learn some things, and so will you. We're going to have a new president that will have his own ideas also. And we have learned that also. So we're very excited. We're very excited. He has an opinion about a lot of things. And I'm very excited about learning more about our new president-elect and the things that he will bring to the table. But I will tell you that he challenged me a long time ago. He said, Pete, I think you guys need to solve more problems than debate and do things for some smaller period of time. You need to fix problems. And he said, that's what you can count on me to do. So we're going to learn that some of it will be through trial and error and fire and brimstone. So I think it's going to be a good thing. So that's my opening statement.
Boy, trial and fire and brimstone, that's something to look forward to, isn't it?
Well, I'm barely a Christian. I'm a Methodist.
Oh, me too.
No,
I didn't realize that we were just on
I'm
the
a
rim.
committed Christian. I didn't mean that. But what I mean is
Yeah.
we're going to learn what the Sermon on the Mount's like probably on a regular basis. So.
As long as we don't have to learn to tweet. I'll be okay. All right. Well, let me make an opening statement,
Yes,
too,
ma'am.
because I really am glad to be back. It seemed like we were home an inordinate amount of time, and so it's really good to get back to work, and I certainly want to welcome our new members. It'd be wonderful to have you here. It's always nice to have another woman, Lynn. We have to carry that part of it pretty well, and we hold our own, don't you think, gentlemen? Okay, and Mr. Congressman Buck, how nice to have you with us as well. So Happy New Year to everybody. That's pretty much my opening statement, except I look forward to, yesterday we talked about open process. We really need to do more of that. And we are looking for, we really are here to work. I don't think there's any question about any of that on the four of us on our side. So we do look forward. There are a lot of things certainly that need to be done. I'm pretty concerned about the world at large. I'm sure we all are. It's looking at some of the elections that are taking place in Europe are somewhat concerning, and we've got to keep a good eye out here. So before I get into fire and brimstone here, let me just say I'm happy to be back. Look forward to working with all of you, and consider everybody here to be part of the family. So thank you very much.
I think it's worth noting, because I believe it's a true statement, that Steve Cody has assembled a very good team, and Don has also.
He's been marvelous. We thank you, Steve, we're really good. And Don, let me tell you, when,
He's
there
right
he
over here.
is. I don't know if you all know, but Don was at the White House for quite a while. And they still miss him. I think yesterday, everybody leaving over there sent him their emails. Isn't that about right? So that they always know where he is. He's extraordinary. I think getting to know Don, you'll all recognize that as well.
Well, I think it's important for us, as we have always tried to do, is to listen to each other. And Don is exceptional. He came over yesterday and gave me the benefit of,
Right.
of talking to us for a minute,
Right.
and I hope that Mr. Cody is able to do the same thing.
We have great admiration for him. We miss you a little bit. Saw him yesterday.
Yeah.
But let me do before I yield back. This is the most important committee in the House, I think. We really set the tone for an awful lot of things. The amendments we make in order, and the things that we do here set the pattern for the country. And it's really critical what we do up here, and we need to approach it with a great deal of seriousness that it deserves. So thank you very much, Mr. Chairman.
Yes, ma'am. Thank you very much. That concludes our opening comments. The first order of business is the adoption of the committee rules for the 115th Congress. And the chair will now be in receipt of a motion from the gentleman from Oklahoma, Chairman Cole.
Mr. Chairman, I move the Rules Committee adopt the chairman's proposed committee rules for the 115th Congress.
The proposed changes include making the committee rules consistent with H.Res 5, with removal of the requirements for the committee to adopt an oversight plan. While the committee is no longer required to adopt an oversight plan, the committee will review and study on a continuing basis the application, administration, execution, and effectiveness of those laws or parts of laws, the subject of which are within our jurisdiction. So without objection, the proposed rules will be considered as read and open for amendment. Is there any discussion or amendment to?
I do have an amendment, Mr. Chair.
Gentlewoman's recognized.
My amendment would require that the committee reports accompanying each special rule contain a running tally of how many closed rules have been reported this Congress. My amendment would simply require us to tell the public how many times we use closed rule. Closed rules prohibit members of the entire Congress from being able to offer amendments during that session. The 113th Congress was the most closed Congress in history, with 83 completely closed rules. The 114th was not very much better. We broke our own record during the first session, or you did. I'm not going to be
Ma'am.
complicit in that. You broke your own record during the first session by issuing 48 closed rules, the most closed rules in any year in the history of the Republic. Requiring a tally of closed rules in our committee reports would provide the American people with the transparency that they deserve, and I urge the adoption of my amendment.
Thank you very much. Discussion. I would add to this that when the committee reports a closed rule, that information is made available to members and the public in a summary of the rule and in the committee report. We also provide a tally of all closed rules in our survey of activities that you know that the Rules Committee reports. It is important, and I do recognize what the gentlewoman is saying, and I'm going to oppose it, but I think you see that what we're trying to do is at least comply with keeping score.
Well, the difference, I think, is we're asking for a tally with each rule that's closed. The tally that you cite, that we do at the end of the session, doesn't really tell the story. I think it's as the session goes on.
You consider it late news.
I consider it very important to know that, yes.
Okay. Further discussion?
Because
Yes, ma'am.
the fact is that our side represents about pretty much half the population of the United States. And when we're shut out, their voices are raised as well.
Anybody else further discussion? Anybody? Okay, the vote will now be on the slaughter amendment. Those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Those opposed, no.
Roll call.
Those have it. Gentleman won't ask for a roll call vote.
Mr. Cole? No. Mr. Cole, no. Mr. Woodall? No. Mr. Woodall, no. Mr. Burgess? Mr. Burgess, no. Mr. Collins? Mr. Collins, no. Mr. Byrne? Mr. Byrne, no. Mr. Newhouse? No. Mr. Newhouse, no. Mr. Buck? No. Mr. Buck, no. Ms. Cheney? No. Ms. Cheney, no. Ms. Slaughter?
Yes.
Ms. Slaughter, aye. Mr. McGovern?
Aye.
Mr. McGovern, aye. Mr. Hastings? Aye. Mr. Hastings, aye. Mr. Polis? Aye. Mr. Polis, aye. Mr. Chairman?
No.
Mr. Chairman, no.
Clerk will report the total.
4 yeas, 9 nays.
Amendments not agreed to, not agreed to. Are there other amendments or discussion?
I do, Mr. Chairman.
Gentleman from Massachusetts.
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, I have a fairly simple amendment. I hope it's not controversial. It's designated amendment number 2. And my amendment would require that any amendment proposed to be self-executed or any amendment in the nature of a substitute made in order as original text be available to members at least 24 hours in advance. And if I could just speak briefly, we're simply asking that members have 1 day, just 24 hours, to read the final bill before casting their vote. Former Majority Leader Cantor thought it was so vital that members have a chance to read the bill that he included in his floor protocols a prohibition on the manager of the rule from proceeding until the amendment was available for 3 calendar days. I'm not sure the majority observed this requirement consistently, but at least there was a nod to the principle. Majority Leader McCarthy has conveniently eliminated this protocol. Why was such an important principle stripped from these protocols? We are asking that a similar process be reinstated and made a part of our committee rules so that all members have time to read and understand the final text of each bill before voting. This rule would require that any amendment proposed to be self-executed by the Rules Committee or any amendment in the nature of a substitute made in order as original text be made available to members at least 24 hours in advance. Over half of the rules reported last Congress either self-executed an amendment or made in order an amendment in the nature of a substitute as original text. So I urge the members of this committee to adopt my amendment so that all members have at least 1 day to read the bill before voting.
Thank you very much. You've now heard the amendment from the gentleman from Massachusetts. Discussion.
Mr. Chairman?
Gentleman from Georgia.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, or Mr. Chairman. I'm sympathetic to what the gentleman from Massachusetts is saying, and I have valued the fact that the majority has slowed down the process in ways that give folks more time to read. What I grapple with, I would say to my friend from Massachusetts, is every Rules Committee meeting we have, folks ask for an open rule where amendments can just come up with absolutely no reading, no pre-printing, no thoughtfulness whatsoever, and folks find it meritorious to ask for that in every single debate. I find that no less difficult to grapple with than I do an amendment showing up in our committee where we have an unlimited amount of time to debate that amendment before it would appear self-executed in a base text. So I would just say to my friend, I would love to work with him to find a way to make sure every member has an opportunity to understand the language, be a part of that language. And again, I applaud our chairman for doing what he can to make that happen. But it is an inescapable consequence of legislating that if we're going to have an open process, things are going to come up at the last minute. And if we could commit ourselves to trying to achieve the gentleman's goal, I would oppose having it in the committee rules that we cannot move forward unless we do it in this fashion. But I would hope the chairman would strive for us only to move forward in the manner that the gentleman from Massachusetts is suggesting. I would oppose his amendment, but support our effort to get closer to that. I yield back.
Well, I thank the gentleman for his comments. Unfortunately, I think our experience is that there's a tendency to really not allow members the time to be able to analyze some of the things that we self-execute or some of the amendments in the nature of a substitute. Oftentimes, they don't even go through the committees of jurisdiction. And oftentimes, they're not even talked about when we report out a rule. I mean, at least when somebody offers an amendment, they come up here and they make their case and they're going to debate it on the floor. I mean, when people pass the rule, sometimes entire texts of bills are changed with virtually no debate. I just don't see this as a big deal, other than the fact that people who care about what they're voting on will have an opportunity to at least be able to read the bill, read some of this stuff before they vote on it. So I don't think this shouldn't be controversial, but I think if the intent here is to, oppose everything that we propose here today, then you can vote against it. But I think this is a good idea, and I think we should pass it.
Okay. I think it could be a good idea. I think probably not knowing exactly where and when, perhaps you have a better handle on that than I do, but making sure that we report them in the rule of what we've done is important. It's in the paperwork that we provide, and we talk about a self-executed rule, as you know. But I'm going to oppose this because it puts a deadline of 24 hours, and lots of times a negotiation happens immediately up to, and I know you have been most interested in us setting the time, knowing when that time would be, and I would sooner, so I oppose this. I oppose this. Any other discussion? All right, the vote now be on McGovern amendment. Those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Those opposed, no.
No.
Those have it, those have it.
Ask for a roll call.
Gentlemen, ask for a roll call vote.
Mr. Cole? No. Mr. Cole? No. Mr. Woodall?
No.
Mr. Woodall? No. Mr. Burgess? Mr. Collins? Mr. Collins? No. Mr. Byrne? Mr. Byrne? No. Mr. Newhouse? Mr. Newhouse? No. Mr. Buck? Mr. Buck? No. Ms. Cheney? Ms. Cheney? No. Ms. Slaughter?
Yes.
Ms. Slaughter? Aye. Mr. McGovern?
Aye.
Mr. McGovern? Aye. Mr. Hastings?
Aye.
Mr. Hastings? Aye. Mr. Polis? Aye. Mr. Polis? Aye. Mr. Chairman?
No.
Mr. Chairman? No.
Clerk will report the total.
4 yeas, 8 nays.
Amendment's not agreed to, not agreed to. Further amendment or discussion, gentlemen?
Yes, Mr.
Florida.
Chairman.
Yes, sir.
Mr. Chairman, I have an amendment. It's numbered and designated number 3. And my amendment would require notice to each member of the House when the committee anticipates a closed rule. My view on this is that members should not have to guess whether a rule is going to be open or closed. They should know up front, and we should not have members wasting their valuable time drafting amendments that will never see the light of day. Currently, the Rules Committee notifies members when we are going to restrict the amendment process, but not when we are going to close it completely. Members deserve to know whether or not their amendment even has a chance of being made in order. We should be consistent in how we notify members of the House of the Rules Committee's proceedings, and this amendment would ensure that consistency. But, Mr. Chairman, I have a very compelling argument that I think all of us are mindful of and need to pay attention to. A body that, and I would ask, I know you have, Mr. Chairman, but I would ask the members here, how many of you have ever personally visited Legislative Council? The people that do the extraordinary work of putting our ideas in the legislative process that fits within the rules of the House and with the rules of this committee as well. Those people work extremely hard. They work in limited space, and I argue that they should have more space. They work with limited staff, and I argue that they should have more staff. They are unheralded heroes and sheroes here in the House of Representatives, and most of you don't even know where that office is. Your staff sends down your draft of an amendment, and they chew on it and do the things that are necessary with the parliamentarian's office in order for it to be done. The reason I think this amendment would help that process is if members know that it's closed, then they won't burden the Legislative Council the way that they are and will give them more time to do the things substantively that are needed to be done here. That's just a common sense approach to this. Now, I don't want to cast an aspersion toward any member. None on this body, all of us offer amendments rarely. Even your side doesn't get your amendments made in order. I know damn well mine don't, but that said, we would hope that we would be efficient, save money, and save time of both the members and legislative council. Now, I don't have to call out members here, but sometimes there are people that come up here. The most that I've seen is 16 amendments on a day that we knew that we were going to have closed rules. Okay? I've seen 4, 5, 6, 8, 9, often and sometimes by the same handful of members that are abusing this process. And if we don't get a handle on it, then who will? And this amendment does that, and I think it makes more than common sense. And I would urge our members to adopt it, and I appeal to you, Mr. Chairman, with the reasoning that I've just offered. I know your concerns for efficiency, and I know your concerns for the Legislative Council. And that's my offering to the members, urge that they adopt the amendment, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you very much. Discussion. I'm going to engage in a discussion and tell you thank you. While I oppose it, I want to say that the direction is correct. We began, at least on our side, and I don't know what you do on yours, but we have begun a process of notification, an email that goes to all the Republican members that gives them what we call an advisory. We have a problem in this House. We have had a problem. I hope we're working towards a better solution, and that is letting members know what bills are getting ready to be heard and filing them. You've seen where I go on the floor now, and during time, I will now stand up and make announcements, as opposed to when everybody's gone, then announcing it. This way, a member has an idea, not waiting for the colloquy between the majority leader and the minority leader or the majority whip. That takes place each Thursday or Friday when we leave. I think information is key, and the notice therein. But my point is that in those advisories, we do generally state what we think, what kind of rule might be generally forthcoming with that.
Mr. Chairman, you?
I will.
You always do when it's going to be a restricted rule, but you never do when it's going to be a closed rule.
Is that
I
right?
ask you to do your analysis.
I have
Yeah.
seen it a few times where there are tax bills, and we know, we use the terms we would anticipate, or it is anticipated, or something along that line. But I have seen it say where we would think that this would be a
Well,
closed rule.
Mr. Chairman, if you
Yes,
would
sir.
continue to yield, my argument is this. All of us are members of this committee. What you're talking about, that advisory that is given, that's a good thing. But you give it to the Republicans, and we don't get it. And I don't think that's all right. Maybe then you should just expand it so that at least we can, representing
Yes, sir.
all the 189 members that are here, pass on to them the information that you have.
Well, I think that's a good idea. I will tell you, I'm sorry, I thought we were doing that. I thought we were.
And then you have people like me, Mr. Chairman, that don't do email.
Well, we've got some of those too.
Yeah.
But that's.
We ought to have more if they
The
think
ones
about
that, the ones that chuckle are there, and that's okay, but their staff still need to count on it,
Sure.
which is why
Sure.
we did this. They still have, some of these people are the ones with great operations that can handle this. But I'd like to go to the second point, so the comma with that is, and I am approached often about members who say, that's probably going to be a closed rule, but I've got something I want to say. And would you allow me to come up and do that? And I say yes. I encourage people, but it's not to lead them on at all. I try not to do that, nor do I tell somebody to get your amendment in order, you have to come up here. We don't have those kinds of rules. There are people that want those too. I just think that your point is well made. I think I'm trying to get at it, and I think if we add this, if I go back, I'm going to ask Mr. Cody to please work with your staffs to make sure that you are aware that when these go out and that you have the benefit of them.
Thank you, Mr.
Would the gentleman wish to push his amendment?
Yes, I do.
The gentleman is asking for a vote on his amendment. Accordingly, the vote will now be on the amendment from the gentleman from Florida. Those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Those opposed, no. No. Noes have it. Gentleman asked for a roll call vote. Clerk will poll.
Mr. Cole? No. Mr. Cole, no. Mr. Woodall? No. Mr. Woodall, no. Mr. Burgess? Mr. Collins? Mr. Collins, no. Mr. Byrne? Mr. Byrne, no. Mr. Newhouse? Mr. Newhouse, no. Mr. Buck? No. Mr. Buck, no. Ms. Cheney? Ms. Cheney, no. Ms. Slaughter?
Yes.
Ms. Slaughter, aye. Mr. McGovern?
Aye.
Mr. McGovern, aye. Mr. Hastings?
Yes.
Mr. Hastings, aye. Mr. Polis? Aye. Mr. Polis, aye. Mr. Chairman?
No.
Mr. Chairman, no.
Clerk will report the total.
4 yeas, 8 nays.
The amendment is not agreed to. Further amendment or discussion? Gentleman from Colorado.
I have an amendment, amendment number 4.
Gentleman's recognized.
Thank you. What this would do is it would require that bills are accompanied by a cost estimate from CBO that does not reflect the modeled macroeconomic effects. So we would have, we all have the dynamic scoring model, which I agree is one data point that's good to look at. This would make sure that members also have the actual cost of the bill without including the economic modeling. And there's an important reason for that. We, like looking at economic modeling, but we know it's just that, economic modeling. It's only as good as the economists prepare it to be, and I have no doubt it's always their best guess, but it can be right, it can be wrong. It's very useful to members in making their decisions to have the static modeling too. So members can then build upon that, apply their own economic models and look at it in different ways. There's been too many times in the last Congress that we didn't even know the cost of a bill before we voted on it. And it's very troubling that we would only have dynamic scoring, which by some outside economic analysts really would argue misstates the effects of different spending and tax policies. So it's important to understand the true costs, not one that uses controversial methods, and we really need from CBO and the Joint Committee on Taxation these static estimates as well to help inform the debate around here. So I think that's very important. It's not that dynamic estimates don't have a role, but they already have built in certain economic assumptions which different members disagree with. So I think it's very important to start with the static information, and that's the availability of cost estimates is what my amendment would do. And I hope that we can adopt it, and I yield back.
Thank you very much. Further discussion?
Mr. Chairman?
Gentleman, Georgia.
Mr. Chairman, I've had the pleasure of serving on the Budget Committee as the Rules Committee's designee, and I would say that I 100% agree with what the gentleman's saying about having access to as much and as good of information as we can have. But I would say two things. First, folks disagree with the underlying CBO model, which is why folks have created the macroeconomic model. It would not be fair to say that providing simply a single model would speak to anyone's definition of accuracy. We would continue to disagree about that, which is why the CBO has been asked to provide multiple scoring models. And secondly, and we see this on the Budget Committee day in and day out, we want those scores back. And the CBO, worked as they are, not unlike Ledge Council, overworked and underpaid, cannot produce that documentation fast enough. We almost always, in fact, I would argue always, I'm trying to think of the last time we went to the floor without a CBO score. Sometimes the one is not available by the time our committee meets, but it is available by the time we meet on the floor. I would love to work with the gentleman if we need to look at the House Administration budgets and see what we can do to make sure that CBO is more functional. But at the end of the day, CBO works for us. We don't work for CBO, and so I would not want to hamstring the work of this committee or any committee based on whether or not CBO can
Will the gentleman yield?
be happy to yield.
Yeah, just 2 points on that. One is the work around the static model is less work than the dynamic model. The dynamic model involves more work. It involves looking at building different assumptions about the future. Two, if we can't get the information, maybe we're the ones that need to slow down. So I mean, if we can't find the resource, we can't find the cost of a bill, we probably shouldn't vote on a bill that we don't know the cost of. We should probably wait a week, 2 weeks. We're in session a lot, which is great. We have an aggressive calendar. That might mean that you might need to wait till the next week if with the resources we give them. And again, I'm open to whether they need more resources or not. If with the resources we give them, they can't tell us the costs for a week, sometimes we need to slow down, because I don't think we should be voting on bills that we don't know the cost of. Yield back.
I appreciate what my friend is saying. I don't disagree with him, and oftentimes, in fact, I've seen this chairman slow down the process because we haven't had enough information, and even against the strong push of leadership, he said, hey, no, we need to take a pause and get more information. But again, CBO works for us. We don't work for CBO. Again, every time you all ask for an open rule, amendments are coming up on the fly with absolutely no CBO score whatsoever, and folks are perfectly happy to cast a vote on those measures. I want those CBO scores, and again, as the Budget Committee delegate from the Rules Committee, I will work with you in any way that I can to get those scores, but I do not want to see our committee hamstrung by a group that works for us, not a group that we work for. And with that, Mr. Chairman, I oppose the amendment, but yield back.
Thank you very much. Further discussion? One thing I would like to add, and I think the gentleman from Florida said this, Ledge Council and CBO do an enormous job for us, and they are overworked. Our conference yesterday presented new work for them also. And I would expect that money needs to accompany that, and the gentleman from Mississippi, the young chairman, is going to have to do that if we're going to accomplish what we're asking them to do. It can't be, you go do what we want, but we're not going to give you resources. It clearly is a resource allocation, equal time frame model. But with that said, I think the points that the gentleman from Georgia makes are timely, and I would just add the last part here. The answer is as good as the assumptions many times. And I think that these people at Ledge Branch and CBO do a great job for us. So we're through with the discussion. We'll now vote on the gentleman from Colorado's amendment. Those in favor of proposed amendment signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Those opposed, no. No. Those have it.
Roll call, Mr. Chair.
The gentleman asks for a roll call vote. Clerk will poll the committee.
Mr. Cole? No. Mr. Cole, no. Mr. Woodall? No. Mr. Woodall, no. Mr. Burgess? Mr. Collins? Mr. Collins, no. Mr. Byrne? Mr. Byrne, no. Mr. Newhouse? No. Mr. Newhouse, no. Mr. Buck? No. Mr. Buck, no. Ms. Cheney? Ms. Cheney, no. Ms. Slaughter?
Aye.
Ms. Slaughter, aye. Mr. McGovern?
Aye.
Mr. McGovern, aye. Mr. Hastings? Aye. Mr. Hastings, aye. Mr. Polis?
Aye.
Mr. Polis, aye. Mr. Chairman?
No.
Mr. Chairman, no.
Clerk will,
4 yeas, 8 nays.
amendments not agreed to, not agreed to. Further amendments or discussion? Okay, I see no further amendments at this time. We will now move. Those in favor of the motion, please signify by saying aye. Aye. Those opposed, no. The ayes have it, the ayes have it. And let's see here. You know, we do a script once a year, Louise. It is now in order to provide for the composition of subcommittees on the 115th Congress. The chair will be in receipt of a motion from the gentleman, the chairman from Oklahoma.
Mr. Chairman, pursuant to Rule 5C of the committee rules, I move that each of the two subcommittees during the 115th Congress should be composed of 5 majority members and 2 minority members.
Thank you very much. You've now heard the motion. Is there a discussion or amendment to that? Seeing none, the vote will now be on the motion. Those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Those opposed, no.
No.
The ayes have it, the ayes have it. I have not had a chance to fill out our rostrum or to work with our members on their participation of our subcommittees. So we will be doing that in the near future. So without objection, we'll postpone any amendment to these subcommittees as well as the chairman and the ranking member, and I suppose that we will get with you very quickly on that. Thank you very much. Without objection, the staff on both the majority and the minority of the committee rules is approved. And without objection, the committee staff is authorized to make technical and conforming changes to rules reported by the committee in duration for the 115th Congress. Okay, without objection, the organizational meeting is now adjourned. Thank you very much. This ends that part, and we will now open up the meeting, ready to do business now, and I see that we've got some of our important members who are here. Welcome back to the Rules Committee. Now that we are organized, it is time to begin the process of getting results for the American people. Today, the Rules Committee will consider House Resolution 11, objecting to the United Nations Security Council Resolution 2334 as an obstacle to the Israel-Palestinian peace, as well as H.R. 26, regulations from the Executive in Need of Scrutiny Act of 2017. In December 2016, the Obama administration broke with the longstanding U.S. policy and failed to veto UN Security Council Resolution 2334. I think this was dangerous and counterproductive to us effectively supporting not only our friends from Israel, but also others in this country about their belief about what America and its allies need to stand for. This effectively states that the Jewish quarter of the Old City of Jerusalem and the Western Wall, Jerusalem's holiest site, are occupied territory. That is a problem to me and members of my party. The United States has long recognized that the solution to the Israeli-Palestinian conflict can only come through direct bilateral negotiations between the two parties. That's why it is longstanding U.S. policy to veto one-sided or anti-Israel resolutions at the United Nations Security Council, including resolutions that put binding parameters on peace processes. For this reason, the United States has vetoed 42 anti-Israel resolutions since 1972. H.Res 11 makes it clear that the Obama administration's failure to veto this resolution violated longstanding U.S. policy to protect Israel from such one-sided United Nations resolution. I believe my party, are proud to stand up for our ally Israel today, and I'm delighted to know that this is a bipartisan issue. The committee will also consider H.R. 226, the REINS Act. During the first 7 years of the Obama administration, federal regulations added an average of 81 new major regulations per year to existing economic headwinds. At least 229 of these rules contain new burdens on individuals and businesses with an annual cost of nearly $108 billion. With unelected bureaucrats imposing such regulations without congressional approval, it's really no wonder that we have seen an anemic 2% average GDP growth in the last 8 years. Congress should take steps to ensure that any new rules or regulations do not inject further uncertainty into the marketplace and do not inhibit job growth or economic expansion. H.R. 26 requires the joint resolution of approval must be passed by both chambers of the Congress and signed by the President before any new major rule or regulation promulgated by the executive branch may take effect. This bill does not prevent all regulations. It simply prevents the enactment of unnecessary, burdensome, and costly regulations without congressional approval. I am delighted today to see the gentleman from Virginia, the chairman of the Judiciary Committee, Bob Goodlatte, who's joined us today, as well as Congressman Johnson. This legislation has been a top priority to ensure the American people are not subject to rulemaking of unelected bureaucrats, and for the first time, we have a willing partner in the White House called the President-elect to advance this common-sense legislation. President-elect Trump has offered strong support for the REINS Act, stating he will, and I quote, sign the REINS Act should it reach my desk as president, and more importantly, I will work hard to get it passed, end of quote. We begin that process today at the Rules Committee. Gentlemen, before I defer to you, I'm going to let our ranking member have her shot at this idea, and we'll yield to her for any statement that she'd like to make at this time. Gentlewoman's recognized. Gentlewoman has no statement at this time. Without objection, anything that you brought in writing will be entered in the record. We're delighted that you're here. The gentleman from Virginia is recognized, the young chairman of the Judiciary Committee.
Well, thank you, Chairman Sessions. I very much appreciate the opportunity to testify today regarding H.R. 26, the Regulations from Executive in Need of Scrutiny Act of 2017, also known as the REINS Act. H.R. 26 has a new chief sponsor who shares responsibility between the Judiciary Committee and the Rules Committee, the gentleman from Georgia, Mr. Collins. Mr. Chairman, the need for this legislation to help create jobs and achieve full economic recovery is clear. Economic growth is the key to job creation and recovery, but America suffered historically weak growth rates throughout the Obama administration. This lack of strong growth translated into deep economic pain for America's workers and families. As just one example, America's labor force participation rate remains at lows not seen since the Carter administration. It was the Obama administration's policies that kept America so deep in this economic hole. To see how true that is, one only has to look at the contrast with the recovery Ronald Reagan achieved. 4.5 years after the recession began in 1981, the Reagan administration, through policies opposite to the Obama administration's, had achieved a recovery that created 7.8 million more jobs than when recession began. Real median household income, meanwhile, rose by 7.7%. Surely the Obama administration knew all along that this was the trajectory on which they placed our workers, our families, and our economy. But instead of fixing the problem by changing its policies, the Obama administration offered only one response: double down, increase taxes, increase spending, and increase regulation. At long last, with a new administration on the horizon, we have a chance to leave that failed approach behind, enact reform, and restore the robust growth that will help America's workers and families. The REINS Act is an important part of that reform. It would provide Congress with vital help in controlling unnecessary new major regulation. The number of new major regulations the Obama administration issued has been without modern precedent. Testimony before the Judiciary Committee during the 112th and 113th Congresses plainly showed the connection between skyrocketing levels of regulation and declining levels of jobs and growth. To make matters worse, under the Obama administration, it was increasingly the case that when Congress refused to enable the administration's flawed policies through legislation, the administration unilaterally issued new regulations to achieve an end run around Congress. The REINS Act is one of the most powerful measures we can adopt to put an end to regulation that wrong-headedly imposes an administration's flawed policies on the American people. It achieves that result in the simplest and clearest ways, by requiring an up or down vote by the people's representatives in Congress before any new major regulation can be imposed on our economy. The REINS Act provides to members of Congress who are accountable to the American people an additional check against any administration's costliest regulatory decisions when those regulations are needlessly complicated or burdensome. This legislation will help reverse the one-way cost ratchet too often turned by overreaching administrations and Washington's regulatory bureaucrats. I requested the Rules Committee grant an appropriate rule that allows for expeditious consideration of H.R. 26. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Chairman, thank you very much. Mr. Johnson, welcome to the Rules Committee. We're not only delighted that you're here, but welcome back for a new session of Congress.
Thank you.
Come as recognized.
And I certainly would like to offer my sincere Happy New Year. I'd like to extend that to all of the members of this committee. It's good to be back, and I look forward to us getting to work doing the people's business. And the people spoke in November. They were unsatisfied with their economic lots in life, and they elected this Congress to go to work and create jobs. Now, my friends on the other side of the aisle will tell us that removing regulations will create jobs, but they cannot answer the big question that looms as large as Stone Mountain back home. And that is, how could, after 8 years of the Obama administration and all of these regulations, how could we ever get to a point where 15.6 million new private sector jobs were created? Unemployment is almost at full employment. It's below 5%. How could we get to a point where there have been 81 straight consecutive months of positive private sector job growth with all of these regulations that have come in under the Obama administration? You can't answer that. And so the real point that I'm trying to make is killing regulations does not promote job growth. Regulations help spur job growth. Proof of that over the last 8 years, as I just enunciated to you. So why are we sitting up here instead of working on jobs that the people in November sent us here to do? Why are we not working on a jobs bill, but instead working on an anti-regulatory bill that rewards campaign contributors and Wall Street fat cats? That's the reason why we're working on this second thing out of the gate in Congress. First thing out of the gate was trying to gut the Office of Congressional Ethics, trying to put the fox in charge of the hen house. That's exactly what removing regulations will do, is put foxes in control of the hen house, and that's what my friends on the other side of the aisle seem to be hell-bent on promoting right out of the gate. And so I speak in opposition to H.R. 26, the Regulations from the Executive in Need of Scrutiny Act of 2017, or the REINS Act. And I also asked the committee to make in order my amendment, which would exempt from H.R. 26 all rules that improve employment, retention, and wages of workforce participants. That's what our constituents want us to do, is protect, promote jobs, and create wage growth. And by the way, wage growth under the oppressive regulatory regime of the Obama administration is up. These are facts, ladies and gentlemen, that can't be argued with. So H.R. 26 would amend the Congressional Review Act to require that both houses of Congress pass and the President sign a joint resolution of approval within 70 legislative days before any major rule issued by an agency can take effect, including those that protect public health and safety. Additionally, H.R. 26 imposes deadlines for the enactment of a joint resolution approving a major rule that could charitably be referred to only as a Byzantine process. It's actually throwing a monkey wrench. It's like a computer virus that you don't want to open up in your computer that destroys your ability to conduct business on your computer. That's what this legislation does to the rulemaking process. Under new Section 802, the House may only consider a major rule on the second and fourth Thursday of each month. In 2017, this session of Congress, according to your published calendar, there are only 13 such days on the legislative calendar, compared to the more than 80 major rules that are typically adopted in a given year. Furthermore, under new Section 801, Congress may only consider such resolutions within 70 legislative days of receiving the major rule. This congressional red tape would threaten to end the rulemaking process as we know it. Even if agencies reduce the number of major rules in contemplation of this bill's onerous requirements, Congress would still lack the expertise and policy justifications for refusing to adopt a major rule. As over 80 of the nation's leading professors on environmental and administrative law noted in a letter in opposition to a substantively identical version of this bill, without this expertise, any disapproval is therefore more likely to reflect the political power of special interest, a potential that would be magnified in light of the fast-track process. Lastly, by flipping the process for agency rulemaking so that Congress can simply void implementation by not acting on a major rule, the REINS Act likely violates the presentment and bicameralism requirements of Article 1 of the Constitution. As Professor Ron Levin, a leading expert on administrative law, noted during a hearing on the REINS Act last Congress, quote, "The reality is that the act is intended to enable a single House of Congress to control the implementation of the laws through the rulemaking process. Such a scheme transgresses the very idea of separation of powers under which the Constitution entrusts the writing of the laws to the legislative branch and the implementation of the laws to the executive branch. Indeed, as the Supreme Court held in the seminal case INS versus Chadha, quote, the Constitution does not contemplate an active role for Congress in the supervision of officers related, the Constitution does not contemplate an active role for Congress in the supervision of officers charged with the execution of laws it enacts. Rather, it was the profound conviction of the framers that the powers conferred on Congress were the powers to be most carefully circumscribed by providing that no law could take effect without the concurrence of the prescribed majority of the members of both houses of Congress. The framers reemphasized their belief that legislation should not be enacted unless it has been carefully and fully considered by the nation's elected officials, end quote. I strongly urge my colleagues on both sides of the aisle to oppose H.R. 26, and I ask that my amendment be made in order, and with that, I'll yield back.
Ms. Johnson, thank you very much. I'll answer your question. You said you had not had an answer about why Republicans would possibly think we need this. It's because over 50% of the jobs that were created are part-time jobs, which is what made this body, certain people in this body, push for a minimum wage increase, because they're part-time jobs. We put rules and regulations on businesses for Obamacare, which pushed people to part-time work. That's an example of I believe, a regulation that was involved in the Affordable Care Act that does not promote full-time work, full-time pay. And so the workaround is, well, let's just increase minimum wage. The bottom line is, I think you're going to get ready to see this marketplace take off when the REINS Act and other opportunities that come from regulations being eased off business. And I think you'll be shocked and surprised with how well we do. Thank you very much. Chairman Cole?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I don't have much in the way of questions. We've seen this legislation before, but I want to thank my friend from Virginia for bringing it, because I think it's exceptionally important. To my friend from Georgia, I don't dispute some of your statistics, but we have had the slowest economic recovery from a major recession in modern American history. And I think regulation has been an enormous part of that. And indeed, it's interesting to me to listen to the CEO of Ford, I believe, yesterday, mention that one of his reasons for investing $700 million here and creating 700 new jobs in Michigan was his anticipation that there would be a new regulatory approach from the incoming administration, as well as hopefully a more favorable tax environment. And I think you can see the market reacting to this, frankly, since the election. So we'll see whether or not that holds, but I think it's a very encouraging first sign. And I can't speak for other members here. All I can say is I hear more from the business people that I represent about over-regulation than I do about anything else, more than about taxation, for sure. And so I think this is a problem. I think it's also a problem for our constituents, because it's pretty hard to know who the Deputy Secretary at the EPA is or at the Labor Department. They know who their members are. And I think making members accountable for these regulations of this significance, where literally voters can see, put your fingerprints on it if you think it's a great idea, that gives them a chance to register their concerns. And what gets lost now is the sheer number of regulations as compared to legislation that impact businesses often far more dramatically than the legislation we pass, is not only frustrating, but if you don't know who to hold to account. And I would mention the overtime rule that the administration was bringing forward. And we saw a survey recently. Number one, 49% of small businesses didn't even know it was coming, had no earthly idea that this was getting ready to impact them. Again, as they learned about it, again, I started getting calls from small business people in my district over and over again about, I'm going to have to lay off people from nonprofits. We can't possibly do this sort of massive change. And indeed, I think the NFIB actually took the administration to court in terms of trying to delay the implementation because it was so unfair. And if you don't think regulation matters, just go talk to coal miners any place in Appalachia and ask them what's happened to their living standards in recent years. Look at the unemployment rates in those counties. So this is a really needed piece of legislation, a very appropriate piece, and I think something that if we can move it through the process, as my friend the chairman noted, will be welcomed enthusiastically by the incoming president. He's made it very clear this is something he wants to see happen, something he would be very enthusiastic about signing. So, again, I applaud my friend for bringing it forward and yield back, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you very much. I appreciate the gentleman's comments. By the way, Mr. Young was Mr. Biggs were very interested in your comments, and probably you have some new fans out there of newer members. Mrs. Slaughter.
Chairman, thank you all, gentlemen, for being here today. As Mr. Cole pointed out, this is something we have wrestled with many times before. And I will quote, if I can, just from the dissenting views. I think you did a good job on them, Mr. Johnson, but maybe this will add a little bit. The proponents of H.R. 427 consistently claim that regulations interfere with job creation because they create uncertainty for businesses, thereby preventing them from investing and hiring. But to the contrary, regulations have no determinable effect on job creation, and we have numerous studies that have always proved that. A survey from the Bureau of Labor Statistics that tracks companies' reasons for large layoffs found out that during the first and second quarters of 2011, layoffs were attributed to poor business demand. And according to Bruce Bartlett, an economist who worked in the administrations of both Presidents Ronald Reagan and George H.W. Bush, the idea that cutting regulations will lead to significant job growth is, quote, just nonsense. It's made up, he said. He's further opined that regulatory uncertainty is a canard invented by Republicans that allows them to use the current economic problems to pursue an agenda supported by the business community year in and year out. In other words, it is a simple case of political opportunism, not a serious effort to deal with high unemployment. And I'll let Mr. Bartlett speak for us, but this has been proven over and over again that this is a solution in search of a problem. And thank you very much.
Gentleman yields back time. Thank you very much. Gentleman from Georgia.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm happy to be back with folks to get to work, and I hope in the midst of a bill that may divide us, we can celebrate the fact that time and time again in the last Congress, folks said, "Hey, we're only here because you Republicans are trying to pick on President Obama. You don't like President Obama, so you're in here trying to restrict administrative power." Of course, this bill came up not, as my friend from Georgia suggested, at the request of fat cats in this Congress. I reject that wholeheartedly. This bill was introduced last Congress. This bill was introduced to Congress before last Congress. This bill has been here over and over and over again, and candidly, I say to my chairman, Mr. Goodlatte, thank you for bringing it up as the first thing. I can't tell you how many folks back home said, you know what, you Republicans really were just picking on the Obama administration. You're going to let some Republican executive run wild down there at the White House. Where's your defense of Article I powers with a Republican in the White House? And here you are on day two of the new Congress saying this is exactly where our defense is. I want to ask you, I thought what my friend from Georgia suggested is that these bills can only come up on the second and fourth Thursday. My understanding was that on the second and fourth Thursday, when these bills have ripened, I don't have to wait on you to bring up the approval resolution. I don't have to wait on the Rules Committee Chairman, that it's going to be in order on those 2 days each month for any member of Congress to go to the floor and bring up the resolution, but that we have the ability as a Congress to direct the approval at any time. Am I misunderstanding the rights that this gives to absolutely every member of Congress? I'm reading here on page 12, on the second and fourth Thursdays of each month, it shall be in order for the Speaker to recognize any member who favors passage of the joint resolution, as it has appeared on the calendar for at least 5 legislative days. I view this as opening up the process to allow us to ensure that these approval resolutions get dealt with, not as trying to prevent these approval resolutions from being dealt with. Is my optimism?
No, sir. I think the intention here is that these be examined promptly and they can be brought up by someone who's an opponent of it or an opponent of it. We try to make this process easy, but we also want to make sure that we are restoring Article 1 powers to the United States Congress, which the very first sentence of Article 1 says, all legislative authority herein granted shall reside in a Congress of the United States comprised of a House and a Senate.
This idea is a good idea. Period. This authority should reside with the representatives of the people here. If, as my friend from Georgia has suggested, there's a constitutional question with the presentment clause or elsewhere, is it the committee's intention to continue to pursue the goal of this legislation, irrespective of the challenges that may come down the line?
Well, we do not believe that there is a valid constitutional challenge to this legislation. We have looked at the presentment clause argument, and we do not believe that this is in violation of that. And I would also note that this idea originated with Justice Breyer, a member of the United States Supreme Court, who said this would be an effective way for Congress to review legislation following a very controversial Supreme Court decision called INS versus Chadha. And so this is a part of the response to that problem of too much authority being drifting for a long time over to the executive branch.
Well, I confess to you that a great deal of my anxiety about what happens in a new Congress and a new administration has centered around whether or not we, as the Article I branch, would have the same commitment to oversight on a Republican administration as we have had on a Democratic administration for the past 8 years. You have done a great deal to put that anxiety to rest by bringing this bill forward today, and I'm grateful for that.
Thank you, Mr. Woodall.
Mr. Chairman, I yield back.
Thank you very much, gentleman from Massachusetts.
As Mr. Woodall pointed out, I mean, we have considered this in the 112th, the 113th, the 114th Congress. We've talked this thing to death. It's like a bad rerun, and in the interest of time and to spare everybody having to watch the entire show all over again, you can get my questions if you go back and look at the transcripts from the 112th, 113th, and 114th Congress. I look forward. I think I'm going to handle this rule on the floor tomorrow, so I'll have more to say, but I will yield back my time.
Thank you very much. The gentleman from Alabama.
Yes, sir. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I wanted to answer the gentleman from Georgia's question, how do we answer the, quote, facts, close quote, that he laid out? And you answered them in part, but I'd like to go a little bit further. Over the last 8 years, we've had the lowest economic growth of any recovery in the history of the United States since the Great Depression. Number two, as the chairman pointed out, much of the job growth that we've had, and we've had historically low job growth during that low GDP growth, most of the job growth we've had has been in part-time jobs, which has caused a lot of problems for people because as they reenter the workforce, they can't get the full-time job that they had with benefits and the pay that go with that. They're getting part-time jobs. A lot of those part-time jobs are originating from employers that are afraid to go to full-time jobs because of what the regulatory environment is doing to them. Number three, well, let me finish, and I'd be happy to get into a colloquy about this with you. Number three, we have a historically low labor force participation rate because we've had a historically high number of people that have simply dropped out of the labor force because they can't find a job, because we quit producing jobs at the level that we had been prior to 2008 because there's so much uncertainty in the economy. Now, some of that uncertainty occurs from economic factors. things that are beyond the reach of the government or beyond the reach perhaps even the United States. But a lot of them are things that result because of regulatory activity. I can give you a concrete example in my own district, and I don't have any, I represent Lower Alabama. We don't have any Wall Street fat cats. We got a bunch of very small, medium-sized businesses like your district does, I know. And I've got a very concrete problem with a very sort of arcane agency no one's ever heard of most of the time, the National Marine Fisheries Service has decided to reduce our red snapper season to 9 days. You may say, well, that just affects people that go fishing. Well, it affects people in the charter boat industry, it affects people in the headboat industry, it affects people that sell ice and fuel to these boats. It's had a dramatic negative economic impact, and they've had a significant loss of jobs just from that one little arcane thing. The truth of the matter is, every time the government acts to regulate the private sector businesses, they take away some of the latitude of the businesses to make their own decisions, and that cuts back on the likelihood that they're going to be able to create new jobs. And there are dozens of economic studies that show that is true, dozens of them. I don't need those because I talk to those people that have those small to medium-sized businesses in my district. Now, I went to law school, took administrative law, and here's what I remember from that. We don't retain implementation power ever, but we do delegate legislative power all the time to regulatory agencies. That's, in great extent, what we've done over the last several decades. We've delegated our Article I power to unelected federal bureaucrats who do legislate. That's what rulemaking is. Rulemaking, which is the heart of regulatory activity, is the legislative activity of these federal agencies that we've given to them. The REINS Act takes it back, but only with regard to these regulatory activities that have these very large economic impacts on the American economy. So I would say in response to you that I think that there is dramatic evidence that the overreach of the last 8 years has harmed the American economy and harmed the American worker. And I think that there's dramatic evidence that it's not just right because we should have our Article I powers back, but I think the American people, and I think they said this in this last election, expect us to take it back so that we can preserve their ability to get a good full-time job that gives them the wages and the benefits that they'd like to have. And I know you wanted to respond to that.
Yeah, I did. I wanted to address the issue of the 15.6 million new jobs, one half of which it has been portrayed have been part-time jobs. I think that's a statistic that is worthy of a fact-check challenge. And I will say that it's true that the app economy, where people go to work, people do things like work for Lyft or Uber, a lot of those jobs are considered to be part-time because they are alternative jobs, but they are yielding full-time benefits for those people who are engaged in them. But I will say this about regulations. Regulations, not all regulations are useful at this time, but not all regulations are bad. And so when we stop the rulemaking process, as we're doing with this legislation, it actually hurts the nation's ability to be resourceful and to be protective of the health, welfare, and safety of the people of this country. That's something that's important, and it transcends just mere profits and job creation. In fact, there are rules that protect people on the job. Those are good rules that many of which would suffer as a result of the inability of federal rulemaking to take place. And the president certainly, or the executive branch that implements the laws that Congress passes, certainly has the requirement under the Constitution to take care that the laws be faithfully executed. And so rulemaking takes place under that authority, and that is a legitimate authority that so-called bureaucrats have. Those bureaucrats go to work every day working to do what's best for the American people. I don't begrudge federal workers for the jobs that they do. I think most of them do their work in a very conscientious manner. But your point is well taken. There are many regulations that are out there that need to be reviewed, need to be rescinded. And if we had the resources in place to be able to do that, I think we could do it. But again, this legislation stops rulemaking in its tracks, and for that reason, I oppose it.
Well, the resourcefulness that, and I want to give the chairman a chance to say something, the resourcefulness that I want to see is not in the government, it's in the private sector. And we cut off the resourcefulness of the private sector by these over-regulations that we put out, not just over the last 8 years. I can go back years before that and show you examples where it's hurt. But I'm sorry, Mr. Chairman, you had something you wanted to say.
Well, no, I just wanted to first appreciate your observations about this process and the importance of legislators legislating. You were exactly right. But that process begins before this and involves far more than this. It begins when you make the decision to not pass laws that are harmful to our economy and our society in the first place. And when you do pass laws that are necessary, it's important that we do it in a manner that limits the amount of regulations that need to be written by the executive branch. So the more specificity that we can put into legislation, the better. But nonetheless, we know there are going to be regulations that are being written, and we're not in any way stopping that rulemaking process. We're simply saying that that process has to be a finishing line back in the United States Congress so that the Congress can look at the regulations based upon the law that has been passed and say, yes, that's what we intended, or no, that's not what we intended. And if it's not what we intended, we'll send it back and there'll be even more rulemaking work. So we're not stopping the rulemaking process. We're just making sure that it reflects the legislative intent of the people through their elected representatives.
Well, I appreciate the chairman's remarks, and I just make one final observation, and I'll yield back. The gentleman from Georgia referenced the new economy, and it's got so many different names now, not just Uber and Lyft, the gig economy, et cetera. I was in a meeting before Christmas with a few other members of Congress with some people, a large number of people from that economy, and they were going through all the different regulations that are out there that are limiting their ability to create jobs in that new economy. So this regulatory regime we've got in place that never anticipated these sorts of jobs. I mean, when we passed the legislation, when Congress passed legislation that essentially set these regulations in place, no one ever thought of that sort of an economy. And so now we've got regulations out there that are coming from legislation that was passed at a time when no one could even think of a workplace that looked like that. Yet our regulatory regime doesn't change. It's like if you're, if you're a hammer, everything's a nail, and we keep hammering at the nail, except the nail's not a nail anymore. It's something a lot more high-tech. And so I would say to you, I think sometimes it's a good idea for this new economy, this new workplace that's dawning upon us out there, for Congress to take back our authority so that we can think through with those people in those new parts of our economy, what's a better way to do this? Or perhaps the better way to do this is just let them go, let them do their thing. So I just wanted to make sure that I answered some of the things that you said because I appreciated your thoughtfulness about it. And I yield back, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, gentlemen. Gentleman from Florida is recognized. Gentleman from Washington is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And let me say welcome to our two new members on the committee. I appreciate their willingness to do the work here. I want to thank Mr. Goodlatte and Mr. Johnson for coming before us and really giving us a good insight on both sides of this issue, this debate. As some have said, this has been going on for several Congresses. I've only had the privilege of watching the debate for one. But as Mr. Woodall intimated, there has been some speculation that perhaps this was just something the Republicans were doing to take on the Obama administration, to restrict their ability to move forward in important, as they see, regulations. And it is refreshing. It is a renewal of our hope and our intent to move forward in a positive way, that we're willing to do this for the current administration as well. And like the chairman said, this is not a way necessarily to stop regulation. I look at it as in a more positive light, that this is a way to underscore the process and the importance of moving forward with good regulation. Make sure that the legislative intent is followed. At least I think that that's what the underlying bill provides for, is that all important legislative intent is followed, and it gives us a process to do that, I think. And I would ask that question to make sure that my belief is correct. But you know, I don't see this as a fox watching the hen house. I think if we're the foxes in the hen house, I would see as the taxpayers, the job creators, I would say that we're the representatives of them and doing our legislative duty to make sure that the administration is looking out for them in the same way that we are. And so I think it's our incumbent upon us to take this action. And so just for clarification, Mr. Chairman, and Mr. Johnson would have a view on this as well, is that not the case, that this actually strengthens our ability to make sure that legislative intent is followed?
Well, if the gentleman would yield, I completely agree with that. That is the intent of this legislation. It is to restore to the only part of our government where the predominance is people elected directly by the citizens of this country. That's us. We are designated by the very first sentence of the very first article of the Constitution to write the laws of the land. And if we write laws in a manner that is not well thought out, and then turn it over to an agency, they have the opportunity not only to write those laws by doing all of the details and regulations subject to no final review by us, but they can also, decades later, go back and rewrite those regulations, as they've done with the Clean Water Act and the Clean Air Act, in efforts to re-regulate in new ways that were never intended by the legislative branch, the Congress, back in the 1970s when those laws were written. So this is a way to not only make sure that what we do now reflects in the regulations that are written, but it's also a stop against the executive branch being able to become a self-perpetuating body that doesn't need a Congress elected by the people any longer. This is very, very important to stop that.
Appreciate that. Appreciate
that. Yeah, I would interject that the intent of the legislation may well, it could be argued, be to claw back some legislative power that has been given away to some nameless bureaucrat. But the effect of this legislation is to stop rulemaking in its tracks.
Well, I certainly see it differently. I don't think it stops rulemaking. I think it actually helps the process to make sure that the rulemaking reflects the intent of Congress. And so if it stops bad rules that don't reflect that, then I guess your point is well taken. But I look at it in a different way. And like I said in my earlier comments, the fact that we are willing as a majority to put these restrictions on a Republican administration, I would think the Democrats would embrace this idea and to provide requirements that the current and soon the past administration never had. But I certainly appreciate the intent of the bill. I think it's necessary, and I think it's a good step forward. And I appreciate both of you coming forward. And Mr. Chairman, I would yield back.
Thank you very much, Mr. Newhouse. One of our new members, Mr. Buck, I don't know if you had a chance to see him, Mr. Chairman, and Mr. Buck and Ms. Cheney are our newest members that we have here.
And I would add that your committee is well populated by fine lawyers that were trained on the House Judiciary Committee, including Mr. Collins and Mr. Buck.
Mr. Buck considered me your spy at the Rules Committee. The spy is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And I appreciate both gentlemen from the Judiciary Committee being here. I wanted to just note for Mr. Johnson that when you refer to Stone Mountain as an imposing mountain, and I come from Colorado, and we call that a bump.
I was trying to think of something more appropriate.
1,686 feet in elevation. We don't even count something as a mountain until we get to 14,000 feet. So
point well taken, sir.
Yeah. I also wanted to mention, you talked about some unemployment figures. There are 92 million Americans now out of the workforce, and that is a record for the last 35 years. And while we have some growth in employment, it is not the kind of quality employment that we believe on this side of the aisle that we need to have. And I think this REINS Act is certainly going to address that in a positive way. Mr. Chairman, Chairman Goodlatte, I was wondering, I appreciate the limited nature of the REINS Act. It does not affect all regulations. It is not going to stop regulatory activity in general. In fact, it only affects a very small percentage of the tens of thousands of regulations that have been promulgated in the last 8 years. And I was wondering if you could comment on the fact that what we're talking about here is a very limited bill in scope.
Well, you're absolutely right. There are thousands of regulations each year, and this would estimated in the previous administration. I'm not saying it'll be the same in the new administration or future administration, but the previous administration, probably 80 to 100 a year. So out of that large number. But in terms of the economic impact, in terms of the cost to our society, in terms of the cost to businesses, the cost in terms of jobs, this will have a major impact because it addresses those largest regulations, some of which can cost tens or even hundreds of billions of dollars if they're implemented with poor regulation. So I think it will have a major impact. As to the same kind of review process for other regulations, I think we would have to find a more streamlined process to do that, because this will take a lot of time with Congress in and of itself if you had 80 to 100 of these reviews every year going into the future. But you know what? You have to walk before you run. So,
well, Mr. Chairman, it also might have the effect of people in the administration being a little more reluctant to pass or promulgate regulations on such a broad in such a broad way.
Well, you're absolutely right. If we find there are not very many regulations coming forward, then perhaps we could expand the review. But this is, I think, a very good first step.
The other question I had for you, Mr. Chairman, is to me, this is not a partisan issue, and I'm surprised that it has become a partisan issue. To me, this is a constitutional issue. We fought a revolution in this country to remove the yoke of a monarchy from our shores, and this is an issue where the People's House and Congress, this branch of government, is trying to make sure that there is a say in how we're governed. And when I talk to the small business people in my district, I am amazed at how bank regulations and the EPA and so many other agencies have promulgated regulations that are incredibly burdensome. And I'm wondering if you would comment on the constitutional nature of this as opposed to the partisan nature of this bill.
Well, correct. And again, as I've mentioned previously, the legislative authority of the United States government resides in this body, in the Congress. And we have delegated that authority to agencies to write regulations, and it has gotten way, way out of control. It's time for us to start pulling that back, and that's why I view this legislation as so important, as an important first step. I think you also make a very good point regarding the bipartisanship of this, because the Democratic members of the House have heard us complain bitterly for the last 8 years about regulations coming out of the Obama administration. But now we're going to have a new administration of a different party, and they may avail themselves of this legislation to say, we don't think that is what the Congress intended. And if they have a majority in the Congress, they can prevail upon not allowing regulations that come forward in this administration. That's the way it should work. This is a constitutional issue. It is a separation of powers issue. And it is important that people recognize the bipartisanship. We've always had some members of the other party supporting this legislation in previous Congresses. I would hope that we would get more support on the other side of the aisle as we move forward on this.
And Mr. Chairman, I thank you for your leadership on this bill and on the Judiciary Committee. I yield back.
Thank you, Mr. Buck.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Mr. Buck. Ms. Cheney.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman, and I'd like to thank also Mr. Goodlatte and Mr. Johnson for being here, for your work on these issues. I just want to say I think this is exactly the kind of thing that those of us who were elected or re-elected this November, and President-elect Trump as well, this is exactly the kind of thing that people sent us here to do. And certainly across this country, I know in my own home state of Wyoming, regulations are killing us. The notion that this is somehow a solution in search of a problem, with all due respect, just doesn't bear any relationship to the reality we're seeing on the ground. And it's not just the sort of arbitrary heavy hand of regulation we've had to deal with for the last 8 years, but it has been absolutely a targeting, and in the case of Wyoming, a targeting of our coal industry, an industry that's crucial to the generation of power all across this nation, that's certainly crucial to our economy in Wyoming, and an attempt to use regulation by unelected bureaucrats to put our coal industry out of work. This is not an effort by any means at all that's focused on trying to help fat cats, trying to help Wall Street. Many of those who are most hurt by these regulations, as my colleagues have said, are people in communities and small towns all across our country. And so I want to just thank very much Chairman Goodlatte for bringing this forward. I think this is exactly what we're here to do. And I look forward very much. I'm honored to be here as a member of this committee, and honored that one of the very first things I get to work on is this REINS Act, which is fulfilling a promise to the American people and to those who elected us. So thank you very much. I yield back.
Thank you very much. Is there any other member of the committee that would seek time? The gentleman from Louisville, Texas. Dr.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I apologize for being out of the room when our witness is presented, but I would just like to seek a point of clarification for myself on as a rule, current practice is a rule is promulgated by the agency, and it spends some time down in the Office of Management of the Budget of the White House. Is that correct? Now, the bill is presented to us is the $100 million figure would be calculated by the Comptroller General. Do I understand that correctly?
It's OIRA.
So that's through the
Office of Information and Regulatory Review.
And that is through the Office of Management of the Budget down at the White House, or is that a separate agency?
I think it's the GAO would report to us on what OIRA said, and then that would be the basis on which we would.
And I guess the point is, it was already recognized by previous Congresses that a rule that had significant economic effect needed to be thought about by someone. In this case, down at the White House, they're doing the thinking. It just seems to be reasonable that the legislative branch should be involved in that before this rule is visited upon the rooftops of all of the citizens of our nation. That is we have a government with the consent of the governed, and if we truly believe that, this rule not only makes sense, it is an imperative part of what should be the process. And I think the only argument I might make is $100 million may just be too high a figure. There are certainly cases where a lower figure might suffice, but we need to start somewhere, and I'm willing to acknowledge this is a reasonable starting place. And so I thank the gentleman for bringing it through his committee so quickly and getting it to the Rules Committee.
If the gentleman yields,
Yes.
we had a bit of a discussion about this a little while ago in terms of the number of regulations, thousands of them. You're quite right. They would all deserve review if time allowed for it. Under the current administration, and we hope that pace doesn't keep up in the new administration, but under the current administration, we'd be reviewing about 80 to 100 new regulations a year. It takes a lot of time to do that. Perhaps if a smaller number becomes the trend in the future, we could lower that threshold and consider more regulations. But in terms of the impact, this will be enormous because those 80 to 100 a year are by far, they're not $100 million regulations. They're $100 million and up, some of them in the tens of billions of dollars and more in terms of costs.
Thank you. Yes, I'd be happy to yield to the gentleman.
Just as there would be a requirement that imposition of rules with $100 million or more in impact, there would be this process that would take place. If there were to be a look to do away with a regulation that had that much economic impact, then this legislation would apply to it as well. And but unlike previous iterations of this legislation in previous Congresses, this piece of legislation provides a one-year honeymoon, if you will, for the next occupant of the White House, Donald Trump. from this party, from your party. And with that one-year honeymoon period, he would be able to wipe away rules without regard to economic impact and without the cumbersomeness of this framework in this legislation. He could do so wholesale, and I believe that's what he plans to do, and that's what this legislation would enable him to do. And so from that standpoint, the effect of this legislation on a Republican president would be a reward as opposed to a detriment. And with that, I yield back.
If I might,
Yes, I'm happy to yield
it
to the
sounds
chairman.
like an endorsement of the concept that underlies this, and
And I would remind the gentleman from Georgia that the current president said elections have consequences, but please proceed, Mr. Goodlatte.
well, that's true, but I also want to remind all of us that the Congressional Review Act, which pertains to regulations adopted in a recent time frame, will still be available to us to cover anything that comes about in the first year here. So, and of course, we're going to be utilizing that because lots of regulations are flowing over from the current Congress that we'll be actively dealing with. But if something new comes along within the next year, the Congressional Review Act will be available to us to use for those.
And I thank the gentleman for bringing that forward. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'll yield back.
Does not have the flexibility that this does.
Thank you very much. I want to thank both of you for being here. Mr. Chairman Goodlatte, Mr. Chairman Shabbat, Small Business Committee, wanted to make sure that he told me he was not sure if he could be here today, but that every single bit of what he felt like this bill would do would support small business. And he really appreciates this. Obviously, he's a co-sponsor of the bill, but wanted to make sure that we knew that he appreciated this hard work. And I told him we would make sure we thanked him also for his additions to this bill.
Shabbat's been an important contributor.
Mr. Shabbat is awesome. It's just awesome. Great. Thank you very much. If you'll please make sure you leave whatever you brought in writing for our awesome stenographer, it will allow her a chance to further delve into the correctness of the contributions. Thank you very much.
Mr. Chairman,
Yes,
before we
ma'am.
go any further, may I ask unanimous consent to insert the statement of Congresswoman Sheila Jackson Lee into
Without
the record?
objection.
Thank you.
As a matter of fact, we showed that she was due to be here, and I know that she was here for a bit of time and has had to leave. Thank you very much. We now have two exceptional members who have been sitting here for a long period of time. The gentleman from Des Moines, Iowa, Mr. Young. Mr. Young, do you mind coming to join us here? Mr. Biggs, welcome. Mr. Biggs evidently took us up on our offer, and I've told all of our brand-new members they ought to spend time in the Rules Committee at least to figure out who we are and what we do, that we're just a bunch of nice, really nice people, and we're up here occasionally, but we're looking forward to them doing business. Mr. Young, both of you know that without objection, anything you have in writing will be entered in the record, and anything you brought for our awesome stenographer will help her out, and the gentleman's recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Ranking Member Slaughter, the rest of the members of the committee, and the new members. Nice to see you, Mr. Buckley. We did this bill last year, last Congress, and I came before you all with 3 amendments. And I'm happy to see that one of the amendments is included in the base bill, and I appreciate that. That amendment. Thank you very much. Sorry about that. That amendment I authored last year requires agencies to publish in the Federal Register a list of the information on which a rule is based, including data, scientific and economic studies, and cost-benefit analysis, and where the public can access that online as it relates to the regulation that is put out there. So everybody, the general public, can see what we're all talking about. We can all be on the same page, and we can sometimes debate that information as well. An amendment that I offered last time around and I withdrew had to deal with making sure that regulators and those who impose the regulations also do financial disclosure reports in the kind of the same manner as we do here in Congress, to make sure that there's transparency and no self-dealing, there's accountability. And then there's an amendment that I have that deals with transparency on an even broader factor. I see you're all sitting here and you have your names on your nameplates. I know who you are. When we offer amendments and bills, we have to put our names on it, right? When court rulings come down, the members of the court have to put their names on it, their writings. But when rules and regulations come out, we talk about the nameless, faceless bureaucracy. We really have no idea who is writing these rules and regulations. No idea at all. I have a bill, this amendment is called the Fingerprints Act. You mentioned the word fingerprints not too long ago in this last round, Mr. Cole, and I appreciate that. And it simply says that whoever writes the rules and regulations in any department or agency, under any administration, you got to put your name on it. You have to own it because it has the same effect as law on our lives, same effect as a court ruling. And if that same effect is going to impact our lives, shouldn't we know who is doing this? It's also, it allows you to put down their title and their background. Don't we want to know as well that they have expertise in what they're regulating and putting rules on? I think that's very important that they have that background. And also we can tell if they're just, these are political hit people in any administration out there advocating certain things using political science instead of real science out there when they do these rules and regulations. You know, when you hear about a proposal coming out of Congress or ruling, you say, who offered that? Who's the sponsor of that? But when you hear about a rule and a regulation, you say, well, who wrote that? Well, we don't know. We can't tell you. We have no way of really finding out. And so I think when you put your name on something, you're going to offer a better product in the end because there's accountability there. Business owners back in our district, they have shop signs and their names on their cards. When you offer something with your name on it, you put out a better service, a better product. Some people argue that there's a matter of scope here dealing with privacy with those who are writing the rules and regulations. I don't buy into that. I haven't heard a really good argument as to why their names should be held privately when they have the effective rule of law or a court ruling on our lives. I think that transparency is good. So I'm going to continue to work with this committee, the Oversight and Government Reform Committee, as well as the Judiciary Committee on this issue, but I'm not backing down. This is important because I hear about this from the folks in my district. When EPA's Waters of the USA rule came out, a farmer said to me, well, who's writing that? Who's in those offices writing this rule? I said, that's a good question, and I can't tell you the answer, but I want to find out for you. And so I'm going to withdraw this amendment. I appreciate the opportunity to present it here. I would like any kind of feedback presented from you good folks on this issue and ask that you would work with me on this process. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Yes, sir. Mr. Biggs, welcome to the Rules Committee.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman and Ranking Member Slaughter. It's a pleasure to be with you, and it's kind of fun to be here, having just got here yesterday. My first amendment would ensure that all rulemaking from the EPA is considered a major rule for the purposes of this underlying bill. As you know, the EPA rules affect probably perhaps the most broad aspect of individuals and business in this country, costing literally hundreds of millions, billions of dollars a year to implement those regulations. In my own home state of Arizona, the EPA in particular has resulted in the closure of generating stations, which means that on Indian Reservation and Navajo Indian Reservation, northeastern Arizona, a loss of hundreds of jobs. The coal plant that they use up there is being shut down. That generation station pumps the water from the Colorado River through the Central Arizona Project, which basically provides water to Maricopa County, the most populous county in the state, and on down to Pima County, the second most populous county in the state that only has 15 counties and 6.5 million people. We are seeing businesses that cannot complete their business plans. We have one operation in southern Arizona, which would bring thousands of jobs, but they are in a process now under the EPA, which will take them 10 years and cost them hundreds of millions of dollars before they can even begin hiring people on a full-time basis. The practical result is that in Arizona, probably throughout the country, is my guess, is that the monumental number of regulations promulgated by EPA has cost business and individuals hundreds of millions of dollars, if not billions of dollars, annually. They've unnecessarily delayed projects and hindered economic growth by additionally preventing thousands of jobs from being created. And that's just in my home state. And so I appreciate you letting me make a statement on this, and I know that Mr. Collins has indicated his willingness to continue working with me on this issue, and so I'll withdraw my First Amendment. My Second Amendment gets to a point that was made by Mr. Burgess earlier, and it's actually quite simple. It just reduces that, how the underlying bill defines a major rule from $100 million down to $50 million. My position is that much of the testimony we've heard with regard to separation of powers, in my opinion, an unconstitutional delegation of lawmaking authority over to executive branch agencies. We probably, in my opinion, we should be expanding the scope of Congress's oversight of that, bring that back into this body as much as possible. And so my intention was to do that very thing by reducing the rule down from $100 million to $50 million to qualify as a major rule. Again, Mr. Collins has indicated his willingness to continue working with me on that. So with that, I would withdraw this amendment as well.
Gentlemen, thank you very much. I think you're a prime example of what we were speaking about earlier as we were going through our organizational meeting, and that is to encourage all of our members, Republican or Democrat, to come to the Rules Committee, to put their ideas out. I think Mr. Young probably served notice and received information back on a couple members' feedback about what they are thinking in this committee that does fit within rules, bills. And I think you also learned some from listening to Chairman Goodlatte about not only how we think, but why we think. And I just want you to know that both of you, in particular Mr. Young, has taken a good bit of time to let me know about his amendments, and I respect and appreciate you coming up and making your ideas known today.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Does any member of the committee have any questions? The gentleman from Georgia.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm sorry I had to step out, but I just wanted to state, and as primary sponsor of this legislation, this Congress, it's been something that's going along, that these ideas are positive and moving forward. And I think in this environment, especially with the new president-elect talking about signing this, I just wanted to compliment both these friends, and getting to know, stepping right in as a freshman, doing this. The thing that's great, and being a part of this process, what the chairman was saying is what you're looking to do, you and I talked about and agree with, you can be assured, and the people from Arizona can be assured, you're already stepped in day one fighting for what you believe and what's right, and I think that's a very positive thing. And of course, Ms. Young, you've been at this process and working. This is something that is good. It's an involvement, as you can see, in the process. But I think taking our argument and making that argument back home, people do not care. Many times we just drop pieces of paper. They want to know your heart. They want to know why you did it. They want to know what their motivations are. And I think by doing that, that's what makes this committee special. You're coming up here doing that. This legislation means a lot. I think we're going to see some good things from it. There is always disagreements, but especially on this with our friends across the aisle, and we'll continue to be. But I think on this part, we're very positive, and I think your involvement makes it better. And with that, I'll have plenty to say about this tomorrow on the floor, but I just want to say that, Mr. Chairman, I yield back.
Thank you very much. Any other questions or comments from the committee? Yeah. Thank you very much. If you'll please make sure you leave anything you brought in writing for our stenographer, I appreciate it.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members.
Thank you.
Is there any other member that would seek to give testimony? H.R. 26, Regulations from the Executive in Need of Scrutiny Act of 2017. Seeing none, this now closes the hearing portion of H.R. 26. When I open up the Rules Committee hearing on H.Res 11, objecting to the United Nations Security Council Resolution 2334 as an obstacle to the Israel-Palestinian peace and for other purposes. And Mr. Engel, I see that you're here. We're expecting the gentleman, Chairman Royce. We're going to go ahead and get started. We're going to keep going. I'm sure somebody on our crack staff is going to figure out where the gentleman is. And notice that Mr. Price was here also and has been here for a good period of time. So it's my understanding that Mr. Royce is on his way. Mr. Engel, without objection, anything you brought in writing, we appreciate you being here. That'll be entered in the record, and the gentleman is recognized.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm sure by the time I'm finished, Mr. Royce will be here. I want to say Happy New Year to all my colleagues and friends, and I'm glad to be back as soon as he comes with my friend Chairman Royce. Mr. Chairman, I'm a co-sponsor of the underlying resolution, and I commend Chairman Royce for working with me to improve it. It's clear that our ally Israel does not get a fair shake at the UN, and it's clear that Israel looks to the United States for support against one-sided statements and actions. I think it was a mistake for the United States to abstain in the Security Council last month. The Security Council resolution was biased against Israel, asking nothing of the Palestinians directly, solely pointing fingers at Israel and the settlements is counterproductive to the cause of peace. I'm afraid this Security Council resolution set back efforts to attain a two-state solution. The House of Representatives should be heard on this issue, and I'm glad a resolution is moving forward. Mr. Chairman, I have also joined Mr. Price in offering an alternative to the underlying resolution. I think the alternative will win more votes in the House than the underlying resolution, and I think it makes more sense to consider language that will get the most support. The more friends that Israel has in this Congress, the more secure Israel is, and these two approaches are not mutually exclusive. So I urge the committee to make this alternative in order. If it isn't, I'm afraid that I'll have to oppose the rule, but again, I plan to support and speak out in favor of the underlying measure. I view it as an affirmation of the importance of a two-state solution, which is in Israel's interest and America's interest. And that's the end of my statement. I can continue to talk a little bit more till the chairman comes if you like, but I'm done.
Mr. Engel, thank you very much. I want to state to you that I don't think anybody in this body wants to make this a political football, but silence is objectionable to me. And I think you showing up here and being as not only remarkably succinct as you are, but offering your support to a nation that needs our support and prayers and wishes is critical. I do not think that you've come up here under anything other than the expressed support of Israel at a time when they need it. I will tell you that my friends in the Israeli support community, including Christians and Jewish people, were disheartened to see what happened. I make no light of any of that except to say thank you for being able to see fit to work with Chairman Royce on this important issue. The chairman has now arrived. Mr. Chairman, just so you know, your ranking member has offered a statement already, and we would move to you now. The chairman's recognized.
Well, thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. I will be brief. I'll be brief here in my remarks, but I want to thank Elliot Engel for working with me on this legislation that will put us on record objecting to the recent UN Security Council resolution. And as Elliot has explained to you, I think this puts in a resolution to the Israeli-Palestinian settlement of two states for two people further out of reach, and I'll explain why I think that. But just one day into this session, this resolution has gained, I believe, 50 co-sponsors, and if I'm right in my count, 25 Democrats and 25 Republicans. As members of the committee know, the United States has long recognized that a solution to the Israeli-Palestinian conflict can only come through direct bilateral negotiations between the two parties.
And that is why it is longstanding U.S. policy to veto the many one-sided or anti-Israel resolutions at the United Nations Security Council that attempt to get around that principle. But just the other week, the Obama administration broke with this longstanding U.S. policy by failing to veto UN Security Council Resolution 2334. This dangerous resolution effectively states that the Jewish quarter of the Old City of Jerusalem and the Western Wall, Judaism's holiest site, are occupied territory. That's the Western Wall. It also lends legitimacy to efforts by the Palestinian Authority to put pressure on Israel through the UN and puts wind in the sails of the shameful boycott, divestment, and sanctions movement. Unquestionably, this UN Security Council action hurts the prospects for peace. The resolution and the bullying and harassment of Israel that is soon to follow as a result of the passage of this only happened for one reason, and that is the administration let it happen. Particularly galling is that we saw this coming, and in March of 2015, the two of us wrote to U.S. Ambassador to the UN, Samantha Power, seeking her assurance that the United States would veto one-sided anti-Israel resolutions. With no such assurances, we brought the issue to the House, and in November, the House unanimously passed a resolution which warned the administration against taking such last-minute action. Yet the administration rejected the call from Congress and chose a course that will bring harm for years to come. That's why this resolution is so important, to demonstrate our united opposition to UN Security Council Resolution 2334 and call for its repeal, to head off any more moves that the administration might have in mind for the next few days, and to provide the foundation for the next administration to move forcefully to counteract its dangerous impact. And I thank the members.
Mr. Chairman, thank you very much. I had a chance to thank Mr. Engel, and I will do the same for you. Your thoughtful leadership, your strong support of America's allies and friends is well known. I have just come back from a trip to Japan, and they know who Ed Royce is, and he's a friend. I've come back from Okinawa. They know who Ed Royce is. I've come back from Korea. Strong voice. We're proud of what you're doing, and thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Chairman Cole.
I'm just disappointed the chairman hasn't been to Oklahoma because we're not quite sure who you are, but but we know you're very important. No, seriously, obviously, I just want to quickly thank both of you. I mean, I know there's occasionally differences of emphasis, but you're the chairman and ranking member of a really important committee that people all over the world truly do follow. And obviously, we sometimes have partisan disagreements about policy, and that's fair enough, and that's just the way it is. But so often, you've found common ground and interests that we share across party lines. I don't think there's a more important one than this one, quite frankly. And I just want to commend both of you for working so closely together and finding a way to when we disagree, to disagree respectfully, but when we speak, to speak in a united, bipartisan way. And I just think both of you are exceptional members of Congress and have done an extraordinary job in a contentious era of trying to find common ground. And I'm delighted in this case that we have found common ground. And I know, I think that'll be expressed on the floor. And for those who dissent, that's fair enough too. I don't have any quarrel with that. I just, because of the manner in which you guys run your committee and the manner in which you always conduct yourselves when you're up here. And we would all do well to follow the example that each of you has set for the Congress. So just thank you very much for your work, and particularly for your work on this very, very important resolution. Yield back, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you very much, Gentleman. Yields back. Gentleman, Mr. McGovern.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I want to thank both gentlemen for being here. And going back to something Chairman Sessions said at the opening, is that we didn't want to turn all this into a political football. I think it would be helpful, if that's what the intention is here, to make a commitment to allow the substitute that Mr. Price and Mr. Engel have introduced to be made in order. Because I think some of us, who are longtime supporters of Israel, I think I've supported every economic and military aid package to Israel that exists. I view this a little bit differently than I think the chairman of the committee and even the ranking member may have expressed in their opening statements. And I think that I think a lot of us would feel that it would be the appropriate thing to do to let the House deliberate on more than just one particular approach to responding to the non-binding UN resolution. By the way, so this is it was a non-binding resolution, so this doesn't impose on Israel anything. It is non-binding, but I do think again, keeping with the spirit of Speaker Ryan's opening comments yesterday about trying to respect regular order, trying to have a more open process, that I think it would be very much appreciated by, not just Democrats, but I would assume some Republicans too, if we had the opportunity to be able to consider the substitute as well. You have an opinion on that?
The gentleman yield. I do, Mr. McGovern. I would just give you my thought, because I do want to thank Mr. Price for his efforts, and I do look forward to working with him in the next administration in pursuit of Israeli-Palestinian peace and towards, our engagement and also strengthening the relationship between U.S. and Israel. But as the author, I would oppose the substitute. But let me just give you my thought. What the Price substitute fails to do is to mention the United Nations Security Council resolution. It is not mentioned once in the substitute. And I worked hard with the ranking member, with Mr. Engel, in good faith and in a bipartisan manner, to develop a measure that rejects this dangerous UN resolution. It repudiates the resolution, and the substitute would not even address that resolution. So, from my standpoint, that repudiation of the resolution, along with a warning against taking additional measures in the last few weeks, is particularly important against the backdrop of the Paris conference on the 15th of this month, and the very real concern that there could be further steps at the UN. So, again, the Price Amendment does not include this urgent warning. And additionally, much of the language in this substitute not only pulls from House Resolution 11, but also pulls substantially from House Concurrent Resolution 165, which passed the House in December ahead of the UN Security Council vote. These are valid points on which Congress is already on record, and we are already overwhelmingly on record on those points.
Well, if I could,
yes, sir.
Yeah, if I just could reclaim my time. I mean, I'm just looking at Mr. Price's substitute here. I mean, it says pretty explicitly that the United States should continue to oppose and, if necessary, veto future United Nations Security Council resolutions that seek to impose solutions to final status issues or are one-sided and anti-Israel. It says a lot of other things. But I just say this. I'm not asking the chairman to necessarily vote for this if it comes to the floor. All I'm simply saying is that I think it would be, a positive gesture of how this House is going to operate if, in fact, Mr. Price would have the opportunity to offer his amendment. People could oppose it, and we can, people may have everyone has their own opinions on it, but all I'm simply suggesting is we ought to have the opportunity to debate it and vote on it, and that's it. I'm not asking anybody to take a position on it. When I'm reading it, it seems reasonable to me, and it seems like an approach I'm comfortable with. If you're not, then you can vote against it, but I'm just hoping that we will have the ability to be able to have a separate discussion and a vote on it as well. So with that, I yield back my time.
Gentleman yields back his time. Thank you very much. Any Republican that would seek time on this matter? Gentlemen, thank you very much. Mr. Engel, I hope that you recognize that we've tried to carefully thoughtfully thank you for you extending your hand to the great nation of Israel on your behalf as the ranking member of the committee and working with Mr. Royce. I appreciate y'all, each of you, very much.
Thank you.
If you'll please make sure you leave whatever you brought in writing for our awesome stenographers, allowing them an opportunity to get it right. Thank you very much. Mr. Price, welcome. We're delighted that you're here. I noticed that you've been here for a long period of time, and we are sorry for the delay, but somehow you can make up for it with a great presentation. We know you will. If you'll please make sure, is that light, green light on there? Thank you, sir. Without objection, anything you brought in writing will be afforded the opportunity to make it in the record, and the gentleman's recognized.
All right, Mr. Chairman, thank you. Members, I'm happy to appear before you today and to offer an amendment in the nature of a substitute to H.Res 11. I'm offering this with Ranking Member Elliot Engel and Congressman Jerry Connolly as co-sponsors, and after very widespread consultation among members with varying points of view on some of the issues involved in the Middle East. I have worked closely with the ranking member on this amendment, and while he and I don't agree on every aspect of U.S. policy toward the Middle East, we both recognize the paramount importance of reaffirming our country's special relationship with Israel. We also agree that we must reiterate our country's longstanding commitment to a two-state solution to the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, a hallmark of American foreign policy that has broad bipartisan support and has had that support for 4 decades. Now, I understand, as we've just heard, the underlying resolution is also the product of negotiation and compromise. I know that Ranking Member Engel, in particular, fought hard to eliminate what he saw as its most egregious and politically charged provisions, some of which seem solely intended to embarrass the Obama administration. Despite these efforts, I believe the resolution as currently written fails to credibly reaffirm our nation's support for a two-state solution, and it includes language that is misleading or inaccurate, including some reckless charges regarding the recent UN resolution. At best, the underlying resolution will muddy the waters of our diplomacy and foreign policy. At worst, it could undermine our decades-long effort to achieve a just and lasting peace between Israelis and Palestinians. Ranking Member Engel, Mr. Connolly, and I are offering our substitute because we believe that it's vitally important to put forward clear, unifying language that omits the flaws of the underlying resolution and reaffirms America's longstanding interest in peace in the region. Needless to say, this alternative is not the resolution I would write were I doing so alone. It doesn't, for example, pass judgment on recent events at the United Nations, where we believe there's room for honest disagreement. We're not attempting to address Middle East diplomacy comprehensively. We're not attempting to solve every problem. What we're trying to do in this substitute is to articulate a unifying perspective going forward. Indeed, our substitute is designed to unify the entire House to speak in one voice in support of a two-state solution as the most credible pathway to peace. In this period of great geopolitical turmoil and uncertainty, we must reaffirm the most fundamental tenets of our foreign policy, including our strong and unwavering support for Israel, and we must also demonstrate to the world that we are still committed to diplomacy that defends human rights, promotes peace. I do believe our substitute strikes that balance, and I ask the committee respectfully that it be made in order. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Price, thank you very much. Mr. Price, this entire issue is a difficult one for many of us. It's difficult for you. It's difficult for others. But I will say that it may be a non-binding resolution, but Israel was hung out to dry in the international community. They were hung out to dry and they were embarrassed by an American administration. And I do believe that you're trying your best to have a consensus piece of legislation that would allow all the members of Congress. We've heard from the chairman of the committee saying, but not his name. And I just want you to know that it's a difficult part of trying to get us all together, but I respect and appreciate your hard work because it does take that. And your thoughtful articulation always is not only apparent, your professional demeanor, and I want you to know that it's not gone unnoticed, that we may not make it in order today, but your hard work does matter. And I would like for you to get credit for that in a way that your colleagues say, thank you for bringing it to us, and we appreciate it. Chairman Cole?
Just quickly, I have no questions, Mr. Chairman. I just want to say it's always a pleasure to see my friend and fellow Appropriations Committee members, because we so often fight arm in arm to defend our committee and its traditions. But it's good to see you, my friend, and yield back.
Gentleman yields back his time to the gentleman from Massachusetts.
Yeah, I would just reiterate what I said before. I mean, people can have different opinions on which approach is the best approach to take, but let the members decide this on their own. Let people vote the way they see fit. You know, the notion that we're beginning the new session with a closed rule, when there's a thoughtful substitute here that you may think is good, I do, or you may not. I think it's a lousy way to start the year. This is an important issue, and people ought to be able to express themselves clearly and accurately on this. And as Mr. Price pointed out, I think by objective measures, there were some problems with the with the bill that the chairman brought before us here today. Some issues of accuracy. So, I mean, I think all I'm appealing to my colleagues to do here is to allow the House to deliberate and work its will. If you're against it, then vote against this. If you prefer Chairman Royce's approach better, vote for that. But the idea that one of the first bills out of this committee is going to be a closed rule where we're going to tell members you're not going to have an opportunity to be able to debate and vote on an alternative, I think is not the right way we want to start. So I will certainly do what I can to try to make the substitute in order, but I do think this is an issue that, again, if you don't want to turn it into a political football, I mean, give people alternatives here. Let people be able to express themselves as clearly and accurately as they see fit. So with that, I yield back.
Thank you very much, gentleman.
Oh,
may I respond just?
Gentleman, yes, sir. The gentleman from Massachusetts.
Thank you. Thank you.
May I just respond briefly? I understand there are honest differences in this room and in this body about the action that the U.S. took in the United Nations. We, in this resolution, as I said, are not trying to solve every problem. We're trying to distill a unifying perspective going forward, which we think is really what we should be about at this point. It is objectionable, though, I think, for this underlying resolution to mischaracterize the UN resolution. There's plenty of room there for honest differences without putting forward the notion, for example, that the U.S. has never done this or anything like it. We, in fact, know that in every modern administration, every recent administration, there have been times when we abstained or voted in a way that disagreed with Israel, and that's the way friends operate in the international arena. Nobody should suggest that it has to be totally a matter of perfect agreement in every instance, and I don't know why the resolution can't acknowledge that. It gives a misleading account of past history. It makes reckless charges about what that UN resolution would do. As a matter of fact, the UN resolution has plenty to say about Palestinian incitement and violence. And, you know, as Samantha Power herself said, the focus on settlements, which are an impediment to peace, that's the policy of this country under administrations of both parties for decades. But there is a disproportionate emphasis on that. She was very honest and clear about the defects of the UN resolution. But I think blanket condemnation or misrepresentation of its likely effects is not helpful. So rather than wade into these controversies, knowing that they divide us and that this debate will continue, what we have attempted to do is to distill from this the essence of what we believe our position should be going forward as a House and as a country, affirming our unyielding and undying support for Israel, our alliance, our friendship with Israel, and also indicating that the two-state solution is really the key to a democratic and Jewish future for that state. That's what this is about, and we are aren't asking people to vote one way or the other on the underlying resolution should this alternative fail. But we do think the alternative should be put in order.
Thank you very much. Gentleman controls time.
No, I think what I'm making an appeal to my colleagues on is to simply make this in order so that people can vote the way they see fit. I mean, that's what this shouldn't be controversial. We should be able to have a debate on the underlying bill and on the substitute, and people vote the way they want to. But we shouldn't deny people that opportunity on the House floor. So I yield back.
Chairman yields back his time. Mr. Connolly, I note that you have walked in. I did not have you on the schedule, but we're delighted that you're here.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
And the gentleman should know that anything you brought in writing, we'd like to have you leave it for our awesome stenographer. The gentleman's recognized if you would choose to make a statement.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I will be brief. I have a statement for the record. But listening to this conversation, first of all, I've been involved in Middle East issues for 35 years. I was a Senate staffer on the Foreign Relations Committee during the presidency of Jimmy Carter, Ronald Reagan, and the first few months of George H.W. Bush. My beat was the Middle East. And it's a privilege now to come back and serve in the House Foreign Affairs Committee as a member in the other body. I have a strong record of support for Israel, and in fact, I tweeted that had I been in charge, I would have vetoed the UN resolution in question, because I don't think that's the right venue to be solving our problems in the Middle East, and I believe it can't be a substitute for direct negotiations between the two parties. Having said that, I was proud to work with my friend David Price and Elliot Engel on an alternative resolution that I believe strongly should receive consideration, and members ought to be able to consider. Because Congress, what I've learned in my 35 years of working on Middle East issues, is that Congress is strongest, and Israel benefits the most when we actually avoid the partisan temptation to make a point, and when, in fact, we speak with one voice on behalf of Israel and on behalf of a robust peace process that transcends partisan politics. Our resolution attempts to do that. We try to correct the record, as Mr. Price said, and we also want to provide an opportunity for members, including Mr. Engel, who was the original author of the other resolution, to have a broader way of communicating that is more all-encompassing and that sets a positive bipartisan tone as we begin this new era. So my plea is, don't deny us the opportunity to have this communication, this dialogue among ourselves, and give us the opportunity for consideration on the floor. We worked very hard and very carefully on the wording. The fact that Mr. Engel has added his name as an original co-sponsor gives testimony to that, and I would plead with you to give us that opportunity as the Rules Committee to have our say on the floor. With that, Mr. Chairman, I yield back, and I thank you for your consideration.
Yes, sir. Thank you very much. Does the gentleman wish to re-engage? Mr. Polis, you seek time. The gentleman does not seek time, but does thank you both for being here. By the way, we noticed earlier we have two new members of the Rules Committee, Mr. Buck from Colorado and Ms. Cheney from the state of Wyoming. Any other members seek time with our two witnesses? We want to thank both of you for taking time to be with us. As always, you knew we'd keep the lights on for you, Mr. Connolly, but you arrived just in time.
Mr. Chairman, thank you as always for your graciousness. I
Yes,
appreciate it.
Yes, sir. Thank you very much. Please make sure you leave anything you brought in writing for our stenographer. I would like to, without objection, add into the record the Security Council Resolution 2334, and that would be appearing in the record that we will make sure is available with the record. This, is there any other member that would seek time with the committee to speak about H.Res 11? Seeing none, this now closes the hearing portion of H.Res 11. The chairman will be in receipt of a motion from the chairman from Oklahoma.
Mr. Chairman, I move the committee grant H.R. 26, the Regulations from Executive in Need of Scrutiny Act of 2017, a structured rule The rule provides 1 hour of general debate equally divided and controlled by the majority leader and the minority leader, their respective designees. The rule waives all points of order against consideration of the bill. The rule provides that the bill shall be considered as read. The rule waives all points of order against provisions in the bill. The rule makes in order only those amendments printed in the Rules Committee report. Each such amendment may be offered only in the order printed in the report, may be offered only by a member designated in the report, shall be considered as read, shall be debatable for the time specified in the report, equally divided and controlled by the proponent and an opponent, shall not be subject to amendment, and shall not be subject to the demand for division of the question. The rule waives all points of order against the amendments printed in the report. The rule provides one motion to recommit with or without instructions. Section 2 of the rule provides for consideration of H.Res. 11, objecting to United Nations Security Council Resolution 2334 as an obstacle to Israeli-Palestinian peace and for other purposes under a closed rule. The rule provides 1 hour of debate, equally divided and controlled by the chair and the ranking minority member of the Committee on Foreign Affairs. The rule waives all points of order against consideration of the resolution. The rule provides that the resolution shall be considered as read and shall be subject to a demand for the division of the question.
Thank you very much. You've now heard the motion from the gentleman from Oklahoma. Is there amendment or discussion to that, gentleman? Massachusetts recognized.
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, I have an amendment to the rule. I move the committee make an order and give the necessary waivers for the substitute amendment to H.Res. 11, number 2, offered by Representatives Price, Engel, and Connolly, which would reaffirm the United States' longstanding support for Israel and for a two-state solution to the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. And again, I regret very much that as we begin this new session that we're starting out with a closed rule on a subject that people have some very serious thoughts about. So I would urge my colleagues to support this amendment.
Thank you very much. Further discussion? Seeing none, the vote will now be on the McGovern amendment. Those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Those opposed, no. No. Those having
As for a roll call, Mr. Chairman.
Roll call vote. Clerk will poll the committee.
Mr. Cole? No. Mr. Cole, no. Mr. Woodall? No. Mr. Woodall, no. Mr. Burgess? Mr. Burgess, no. Mr. Collins? No. Mr. Collins, no. Mr. Byrne? No. Mr. Byrne, no. Mr. Newhouse? No. Mr. Newhouse, no. Mr. Buck? No. Mr. Buck, no. Ms. Cheney? No. Ms. Cheney, no. Ms. Slaughter? Mr. McGovern?
Aye.
Mr. McGovern, aye. Mr. Hastings? Mr. Polis? Aye. Mr. Polis, aye. Mr. Chairman?
No.
Mr. Chairman, no.
Clerk will report the total.
2 yeas, 9 nays.
The amendment is not agreed to. Further amendment or discussion, gentleman from Colorado.
Mr. Chair, the deadline for submitting amendments for H.R. 26 was 10 a.m. yesterday, which was actually 2 hours before our members were sworn in for the 115th Congress. And particularly for our first-time and freshman members, but frankly for all members, I think it's hard to expect that we submit amendments before we're sworn in. And it should come as no surprise that only one freshman member actually submitted an amendment in time. So for this reason, I move the committee grant H.R. 26 an open rule so all members have an opportunity to offer amendments to the bill on the floor.
Thank you very much. Discussion. I think the past, your party has probably not allowed, considered a closed rule. We tried to invoke this as an opportunity for all the members to participate if they chose to, and I do agree with the gentleman. The timing was not as long as it probably should have, could have, would have been.
If the gentleman would yield, just to correct the chair, to give the members elect time to submit amendments.
Member-elect.
Yeah.
Member-elect, and so there's a lot of substance to not only your thought process, but the argument. Further discussion? Those in favor of the proposed amendment, signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Those opposed, no. No. Those have it, noes have it.
Roll call.
The gentleman asked for roll call vote. Clerk will poll the committee.
Mr. Cole? No. Mr. Cole, no. Mr. Woodall? No. Mr. Woodall, no. Mr. Burgess? Mr. Burgess, no. Mr. Collins? No. Mr. Collins, no. Mr. Byrne? No. Mr. Byrne, no. Mr. Newhouse? Mr. Newhouse, no. Mr. Buck? No. Mr. Buck, no. Ms. Cheney? No. Ms. Cheney, no. Ms. Slaughter? Mr. McGovern?
Aye.
Mr. McGovern, aye. Mr. Hastings? Mr. Polis?
Aye.
Mr. Polis, aye. Mr. Chairman?
No.
Mr. Chairman, no.
Report the total.
2 yeas, 9 nays.
Amendments not agreed to, not agreed to. Further amendment or discussion, seeing none, the vote now be on the motion from the gentleman from Oklahoma. Those in favor of the amendment, motion signify by saying aye. Aye. Those opposed, no.
No.
The The ayes have it, the ayes have it accordingly. The gentleman, Mr. Collins, will be handling this for Republicans.
And I picked a short straw, and I will handle it for the Democrats. Yeah.
Mr. McGovern, thank you very much. I would note for Mr. Buck's pleasure, Mr. Buck asked me if he could vote no up here occasionally, and I told him he could vote no occasionally, so he got his chance. So, Mr. Buck, welcome to the committee. You're gonna be able to vote yes and no up here, so we'll leave that to you. Listen, I think that we do not expect any other meetings this week, but I know we've got a lot of work to do. I look forward to seeing us next week. This ends our work for the week.
Congratulations on the first meeting, Mr. Chairman.
Oh, man. This Ken Buck is going